Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to our virtual gala celebrating JSpaceCanada's 10th anniversary. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Robyn Fishbein, and I am the chair of JSpace's 10th anniversary celebration. Although we wish that we could be together in person to celebrate this milestone, we are so grateful that so many of you have joined us here after a very Zoom-heavy past 2 years. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our MC for the evening, Jordan Devon. Jordan has served on the board of JSpace Canada for the past 5 years and as vice chair for the past 3 years. Simply put, there are so many things that we've accomplished as an organization in that time that wouldn't have been possible without the endless hours of hard work that Jordan has put in. And I want to thank him especially for all the hard work he has put into tonight's tribute gala. On that note, I'm pleased to welcome Jordan as our MC for the evening.
Thank you, Robyn. That was a very kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome to JSpaceCanada's 10th anniversary virtual gala. This is, of course, not what we had in mind when we started thinking about how we would mark this moment. But as the last 2 years have demonstrated, the ability to be flexible and pivot are key to any organization's success. And so while we're meeting today virtually, I don't think the importance of this moment is any less significant. You know, we're celebrating an incredible milestone, 10 years, and I'm really excited to be serving as your MC for this moment. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Jordan Devon, and I've been involved with JSpace Canada for the past 5 years. I joined the board in 2017, and in 2019, I co-chaired the biannual conference alongside Diane Mendel. And for the past 2 years, I've served as vice chair up until today, when I've been appointed as the interim co-chair alongside Karen McLean. Earlier today at our AGM, we welcomed 5 new board members. I want to name them so you know who they are, because you'll be learning a lot more about them in the coming weeks and months. Maytal Kowalski, Rolf Ben Murgy, Zach Babbins, Raoult Kadar, and Mayrav Jones. I said to them what I'll say to you tonight: it is so exciting to welcome new people into this movement. And today, it's also very exciting to pay tribute to 10 amazing years of JSpace Canada, 10 years of building solidarity, mobilizing for peace, building space for progressive allies in Canada, around the world, and strengthening our community of Canadian Jewish advocates and activists. Over the past 10 years, JSpace Canada has made space for Canadian Jews who care deeply about Israel, who care deeply about Israeli-Palestinian peace, who do not believe that supporting Israel means supporting the occupation, and who care deeply about being a voice for Jewish values, social justice, and human rights. Tonight, we pay tribute to each and every one of you, and I promise to not keep you past 8:40 p.m., but we do have a jam-packed schedule. We have video segments, live discussions, and exciting guests who are here to celebrate the past, present, and future of the progressive Jewish voice in Canada. And while there isn't a Q&A, I do want to invite people, if you have well wishes or thoughts to share, to use the Q&A function, and we'll try our best to make sure that it's recognized. I wanted to open up with the news that we received greetings today from the Prime Minister, who, in a letter to our community, congratulated JSpace for its 10th anniversary. The Prime Minister says, "I would like to express my gratitude to all members for their exceptional work over the past decade. JSpace Canada has built a national presence as a progressive Jewish voice, earning the respect of community members across the country. I would like to offer a particular word of congratulations to Karen Mock, who is retiring from the board after 5 years of impressive leadership. We are all grateful for her contributions, which will have a lasting impact on JSpace Canada and Canada's Jewish community." So today we are focusing on that impact, not just of Karen, and of course we're honoring Karen tonight, but on all of you and on everyone who has contributed to the past 10 years. The Prime Minister is not the only one who shared a message, and to recognize this moment, we put out the calls to friends, community partners, and leaders across the world with whom JSpace Canada has had the pleasure of working with. We wanted to hear from them and from you on what this milestone means and what JSpace Canada's impact has looked like. In response, we received over 200 minutes of video testimonials, and while I know we all love JSpace, I don't think a 200-minute video is the best way to honor this moment. So you'll be pleased to know that we cut it down to 15 minutes. But I'm really proud about the messages we received. So without further ado, let's see what everyone and you had to say.
right from the start, we should give credit to Nora Gold for organizing the very first meeting of what she thought were progressive Jews interested in supporting Israel. So that really sort of was the spark. It resonated with me because I had a lot of Jewish friends who considered themselves progressive, but didn't feel at home in the Jewish community because the Jewish community that supported Israel did it from a fairly right-wing perspective and didn't feel comfortable with that perspective. So there was a need there, and people jumped at the opportunity to help create this space. We had a first public meeting in the JCC on Spadina and Bloor, and the turnout was pretty good and the reaction was very good. And the turnout to our first conference, the enthusiasm of the people who were present was very reassuring. So that gave us the confidence to continue.
I've been a strong supporter of JSpace over the years and have had the pleasure of participating in your programs. Indeed, your mission statement and guiding principles have very much dovetailed with my own, including being a voice for progressive Jewish values and a progressive voice for Israel, being an advocate for social justice and peace, being an advocate of two states for two peoples, involving the mutual acknowledgement and respect for the aspirations and self-determination of each of the peoples.
How can we support building positive relationships between Jews and Palestinians in the Middle East and in Canada in order to work together to really make a difference, to replace hate with hope, and to build a shared society?
Well, this is the 10th anniversary of JSpace Canada, and the work that JSpace has done over the last 10 years has been really incalculable. It has brought together progressive Jews, centrist Jews, and others who understand and have a passion for Israel and a passion for Canadian Jewry. It has been revered, it has gained a legacy in 10 years as a voice of the Jewish people of this country.
Hi everyone, my name is Jenny Isaacs and I'm the director of Heart to Heart, and more recently I've also become the camp director of Camp Shomriah Hashomer Hatzair. Over the past 10 years, I've watched JSpace blossom and grow. I still remember those first meetings in the JCC and talking about how great it would be to have a website. I'm wishing you all another decade of good work to build collaboration and momentum within the Jewish community in support of peace and solidarity between Israelis and Palestinians.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate JSpace on 10 wonderful years of very important work in the Jewish community, on behalf of the Jewish community, and more importantly, in the service of our broader society, both here in Canada and of course in Israel, Palestine as well. JSpace represents the kinds of values that I think we should all be able to get behind: a commitment to pluralism, to peaceful coexistence, to multiculturalism, and to a vibrant liberal constitutional democracy both here and abroad.
Hello, JSpace Canada. As leader of your official opposition NDP here in Ontario, I'm glad to extend a big congratulations on your 10th anniversary, and my thanks for everything that you do. For a decade, JSpace has played such an important role in our country and in our political process. From convening, empowering, and amplifying progressive Jewish voices and values, to your ongoing dedication to and advocacy for Israeli-Palestinian peace. New Democrats are proud and fortunate to count JSpace members among our party's membership and our grassroots activist base. And I'm so proud to continuing working shoulder to shoulder with you as we keep pushing for our shared vision.
Canadian Friends of Peace Now is very glad to have JSpace Canada as an ally in the cause of progressive Zionism. In recent years, we've come together a number of times in joint statements to the Canadian government on Israeli-Palestinian peace. We've joined forces in other ways too, and in so doing, we've made a bigger impact.
You know, a few years ago, I accepted your invitation to speak at a conference in Toronto. And this gave me the opportunity to really appreciate the impact you have in all of your work, the political work, the communal work, and building up a real sense of camaraderie among progressive Canadian Jews. I also want to thank JSpace Canada for your contribution to the development of J-Link, the international network of progressive Jewish organizations. Through your representative on the coordinating committee, Barbara Landau, we have really connected like-minded people all over the world around the issues that we care so deeply about.
In 2019, Alon Liel and I co-created J-Link, an international progressive Jewish network to continue our advocacy for human rights, peace, and an end to the occupation, with representatives from 6 continents. JSpace Canada is solidly on the international map. Kol hakavod.
Hi everyone, it's Jeremy Benamy, president of J Street, the pro-Israel, pro-peace movement in the country just to your south. I'm excited to join you virtually in celebration of JSpace Canada's 10th anniversary. Over the past decade, you have been such an important part of the growing chorus around the world of pro-Israel, pro-peace, pro-justice, pro-diplomacy Jews who are speaking out ever more loudly and frequently and forcefully in support of the core values that we all share from a pro-Israel perspective. It's been wonderful for J Street to have JSpace Canada as a partner over all these years. I know we'll always see you at our conferences in Washington, and we'll run into you in gatherings, whether in person or virtually, of like-minded Jews from around the world. And your voice and your representation of the rational center of Canadian Jewry could not be more important in discussions about Israel and the Middle East as they take place all over the world, and in particular here in North America.
My name is Raja Khoury. I'm CEO of Khoury Conversations. That's where some of you would know me from. I'm also the founding president of the Canadian Arab Institute, and I have spoken at a number of your conferences, the last one being the one in person in 2019. Now, if you don't remember that conference, I'll remind you by an incident that happened that day. An interesting fellow came in and called all of us capos. The word was new to me, but what it said to me, that experience, is that I found that I had a lot more in common with you than you had with him. JSpace's importance to me is that it provided for me and people like me a partner that I can speak with, that I can dialogue with, and have useful and courageous conversations with.
Hi, I'm Yara Sachs, the Member of Parliament for York Centre. I've been a participant and an observer of JSpace's work for a number of years, and I am always inspired by how many of you from our Jewish community, from coast to coast to coast, are committed to the work of dialogue, equality, and inclusivity in the peace-building space. It is not the easy path to walk, but each of you have committed time and again through your participation in JSpace and its programs. Pirkei Avot teaches us that on 3 things does the world stand: justice, truth, and on peace. JSpace Canada is such an important partner in this work, and its advocacy for progressive Jewish values and Israeli-Palestinian peace that is just and lasting are an important part of the process.
Hi everyone, I'm Alistair McGregor, and I serve as the Member of Parliament for the beautiful riding of Couch and Malahat Langford, way out here on Vancouver Island on Canada's beautiful west coast. And I just wanted to record this message to offer my sincere congratulations to JSpace Canada on reaching that awesome milestone of your 10th anniversary. I also just wanted to add a personal note because, you know, when I was younger, I had the good fortune when I was 8-9 years old of living abroad in Israel. I got to live there for a full year because my dad was offered a position at a hospital in East Jerusalem. And so I got to see firsthand what an amazing place that is, the deep sense of history and the importance it has for both Palestinians and Israelis. I wanted to make mention of that because I think it's really important to recognize JSpace Canada's real efforts at bringing a progressive vision to the conflict that's going on in that region, and its efforts in recognizing that we're only going to achieve security if we have a fundamental understanding of both human rights and a pursuit of peace through a negotiated settlement.
Congratulations to JSpaceCanada on 10 incredible years. Wow, your commitment and dedication to providing a strong progressive voice for the Canadian Jewish community and others has been so important. You know, for 10 years, you have been steadfast in your commitment to social justice, peace, and human rights in Canada and around the world. And just last fall, I was both thrilled and honored to participate in an educational webinar discussion with Dr. Kenneth Stern. That discussion was lively, engaging, and included important insights into our responsibilities as leaders, academics, and communities. That's what JSpace is, a place where folks can come together to explore different perspectives, experiences, and share our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion.
During our first decade, I've had the pleasure of watching JSpace grow from the vision of a dedicated few to the participation and support of the many. One of the most extraordinary things about JSpace is that everyone is a volunteer, and what a talented and loyal group of people.
Congratulations on your 10-year anniversary. It's a big deal. And your organization has done incredible work over the last decade. And it's really contributed to a greater level of discourse between communities, but also particularly within the Jewish community. And I know sometimes, and maybe I can speak from personal experience, sometimes it's hard to have difficult conversations about progressive issues within our own communities. But your organization has done that.
We speak about these issues and we're concerned about these issues because we care about the Jewish community. We care about Israel, we care about the Jewish world and our place in it. That's why we need to take action, and that's why we need to stay connected. Continue mobilizing for change here in Canada and supporting change makers across the world, including in Israel.
I'm delighted to join you today to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of JSpace Canada and welcoming a new decade of building hope together. Over the last 10 years, JSpace has been a progressive Jewish Canadian voice and has been instrumental in promoting pro-Israel and pro-peace solutions through education, constructive dialogue, advocacy, and youth engagement in Canada and abroad. Through panels, webinars, social justice advocacy, and the incredible biennial conference, JSpace has worked so hard to create a space for open dialogue on Israel, Jewish identity, anti-Semitism, and human rights.
On behalf of the Federal Anti-Racism Secretariat, I would like to congratulate JSpace Canada for all its accomplishments this past decade in providing brave spaces and amplifying the voices of Canada's progressive Jewish communities to advocate on social justice, equity, peace, and human rights.
Hello everyone, my name is Georgia Gardner, and I'm a third-year English major studying at Queen's University. I first got involved in JSpace when I was looking for a job after grade 12, and I soon began working as the JSpace Social Justice intern, and I've been involved ever since. I first want to wish JSpace a very happy 10th anniversary, and a congratulations on an astounding 10 years.
I'm Zach Babbins, and I've been around JSpace Canada since the 2019 biennial conference. JSpace has provided me with some incredible opportunities to meet amazing pro-peace advocates from around the world. As a progressive Jew, I'm excited to be a part of a Canadian Jewish organization that really champions social justice and peace.
I am so grateful to have been, a part of JSpace for the past few years. I have met incredible people. I've become so close, and I have networked with some really amazing individuals. But most importantly, I kind of feel a sense of belonging that I never really felt in the Jewish community before. So I really think JSpace is an incredible organization whose impact is absolutely immeasurable, especially on, I think, young people like myself who are trying to shape the future of our community. And I think JSpace is an essential part of that future. So I'm looking forward to the next 10 years.
It's really awesome to see the support for JSpace, of course, across party lines, geography, within the Jewish community and beyond. And I think that's a real testament to the power of the work that we do and the foundation that our founders have built. So on that note, I do want to talk a little bit about the past and talk about the founding of JSpace. As you saw in the video, Izzy Lyon mentioned that we need to first give credit to Nora Gold for conceiving the idea of JSpace. For those of you who don't know, Nora is not only the founder of JSpace Canada, but a prize-winning author and activist and the editor of the prestigious online literary journal, jewishfiction.net. Prior to founding JSpace in 2010, Nora co-founded the New Israel Fund of Canada and Canadian Friends of Givat Haviva, and has served on the executive of the Canadian Jewish Congress. She's published 3 books of fiction, and her writing has been recognized with numerous accolades, including the Canadian Jewish Book Award and the Canadian Jewish Literary Award. To learn more about Nora's fascinating work building JSpace from the ground up, I've invited her to speak with us today. So on that note, I want to welcome Nora to the virtual stage. Hello, Nora.
Hello, Jordan. Thank you so much for inviting me here.
It is our pleasure, and thank you for everything that you have done. I know we don't have so much time, and I know we want to get through, a lot of topics, but I think I just want to start off in the beginning. For people like yourself who came before, many of us who got involved in JSpace after your tenure, take us back to 2011. So before JSpace, or I guess in the time that JSpace was conceived, my biggest question is, what was the Canadian Jewish landscape like? What prompted you to conceive the idea for a pro-peace, pro-Israel group here in Canada?
Wow, great questions. And first of all, thank you again for your lovely, warm introduction. And thank you to you and Kara and the whole planning committee for inviting me to be part of the gala and this wonderful 10th anniversary celebration. The first meeting of JSpace, which was an informal parlor meeting at my house, was held on May 12th, 2010. And if you ask what the Canadian Jewish landscape was like before that, the 6 preceding years, starting in 2004, were unprecedented, really, for the Canadian Jewish community. This is because in 2004, it underwent a major transformation when it was taken over by CIJA, which we now call CIJA 1, and today's CIJA is called CIJA 2. Among other things, CIJA in 2007 effectively neutered Canadian Jewish Congress, which under Bernie Farber had a progressive bent, even though it was part of the mainstream. So by 2007, and even in the 3 years before, the mainstream Jewish community had become significantly more conservative than before. Outside of the mainstream, of course, progressive Jewish organizations continued to exist, like the New Israel Fund of Canada, Canadian Friends of Givat Haviva, as you mentioned, both of which I helped found. And there were, of course, other progressive organizations too. But what happened was that the center in Canada's organized Jewish community had shifted, so that progressive organizations felt and actually were more marginalized than ever before. So this was one factor that prompted me to come to your second question, to conceive of the idea of JSpace. Since 1982, when I, with others, founded New Israel Fund of Canada, my activist and voluntary activities in Canada had always been focused on Israel. And all of us here on the Zionist left were putting our efforts into supporting the important pro-peace, pro-social justice grassroots work taking place in Israel. And of course, our goal was to help transform Israel into the country that we felt it could and should be. By the mid-2000s, however, given the changes that were happening here in the Canadian Jewish community, with its sharp bend to the right, I began to see the need to transform not only Israel, but our own community here at home as well. I'd say increasingly I'd been feeling concerned about the conservatism in the community. It seemed like there was no longer a spectrum of legitimate viewpoints. There was only one valid position vis-a-vis Israel that was acceptable. And this perspective dominated the Canadian Jewish agenda and discourse. It felt like there was no space there for people like me, or I should say like us. So for several years, I tried as an individual to inject a progressive perspective into the Canadian Jewish mainstream. For example, I engaged with CJA on a project I'd created, and then I joined a committee at UJA Federation. But without going into detail, these efforts were to no avail. The Federation Committee that I joined for a year in 2009 was intended to be an umbrella group for people across the community to address anti-Israelism on the left, something I was very concerned about. I was then writing a novel about this with Fields of Exile. But on this committee, I was, once again, as kept happening to me, I was just the token lefty. And other than me, everyone was right-wing, so I was unable to have any impact. And I realized after a year of it that I'd been trying individually to change the mainstream community, and that to be effective in this regard, there needed to be a collective approach, a group effort. So I resigned from that committee, but first I told them I was going to start a group of left-wing pro-Israel Jews. I said there needed to be a new group that would provide Canadian Jews with an alternative to both the anti-Israel left and the pro-Israel right. The man staffing this committee asked if he could attend the first meeting, and I agreed on condition that he not speak at all, just observe, which he did at that meeting and at the couple more that he attended in my living room, which were the first 3 meetings of what would become JSpace. You can imagine my surprise, though, when once JSpace became a going concern, CJA and UJA claimed to have started it. But anyway, this in a nutshell is how, why, and where JSpace began.
Oh my goodness, that's, and I think, I mean, I certainly can relate to the feeling of, unfortunately, the feeling of sometimes there being token lefty voices within Jewish community spaces. So I definitely hear that. And I think it's really awesome that you channeled that energy outside of institutional spaces and creating our own, because certainly it's empowered people like me. You talk about, this work into this first meeting. And I know Izzy, and there were a few images that referenced it. It seems like, starting an organization from scratch is a lot of work. What was it like, building an organization up from the ground in the, those first few months?
Well, it was a ton of work, but it was also a lot of fun. It's actually been very interesting preparing for tonight to stroll down memory lane a bit and go through all my files from the beginning of JSpace, all the emails and documents and photos. I've been rereading meeting notes, agendas, minutes of meetings, emails, position papers, everything. During our first year, which started in May 2010, our initial meetings were all held in my living room. And the core group was a handful of people about the size of a minion, actually, most of whom were members of my shul, the first Narayver. And I figured I'd start with this group because the Narayver is a politically progressive place, and I guessed that I would find some like-minded people there, which I did. The original core working group included Frida Foreman, Leslie Turner, Izzy Lyon, Nan Weiner, Anna Paceberry, Pervin, Harry Schachter, Hart Schwartz, Tom Chervinsky, Mika Gang, and Laura Crompton. And there were others too who came to some of the meetings. We worked very hard the first year, but we all felt very passionate, very committed. There was also a sense of comfort and mutual trust among us, since we all knew each other, at least to some extent, from shul or from elsewhere. And also our rabbi, Edward Elkin, attended the initial meeting and was very supportive of the initiative, which lent it some credibility and made people comfortable. We created all sorts of committees and subcommittees, and after a few pretty informal meetings in my home, we began to do things in a more formalized way, and also started meeting in a room at the MNJCC. I think back then it may have just been a JCC, or anyway, it was with the same place. That first year, among other things, we picked a name. We liked JSpace, but then we discovered that another group had already laid claim to this name. And it turned out it was a hot dog kiosk in the United States. So to differentiate ourselves from them, in case someone confused a pro-Israel, pro-peace group with a hot dog stand, we added the word Canada to JSpace and became JSpaceCanada. We created a logo, we produced our first flyers, we built a website, and we began writing position papers. Inevitably, there were some differences of opinion among us. We debated, we argued, and we came to agreements. And we hashed out our opinions very, very thoroughly because we wanted to define exactly who we were and where we stood on key issues before presenting ourselves publicly to the community and opening up JSpace to others. At the end of that year, we were finally ready to go public, and we hosted the event that Izzy alluded to and that you mentioned. And the invitation we sent out called it, quote, an evening of dialogue and participation in envisioning a unique pro-Israel, pro-peace movement in Canada, end quote. So this was the formal launch. Took place on June 13th, 2011 at 7:30 p.m. on the second floor of the JCC. And this is what we'd been working for a whole year. There was an overwhelming response to that meeting. The room was jam-packed and filled with excitement. I presented our vision, and then I took questions during Q&A. And the first question that was asked, and it was the same one that was on everybody's mind, was, why do we need another progressive organization in Toronto or Canada? We already have A, B, and C. And I explained that all the other organizations were focused on transforming Israel, whereas JSpace was about transforming the Canadian Jewish community. And people responded very enthusiastically and supportively to this idea. And we realized then that there was a real need for JSpace Canada, great interest beyond just our little group, and that this had the potential to become something bigger. And the rest is history. Just one last point about that first year. During that whole year, I was JSpace's founder and also its chair or coordinator, as we called it. And I saw my roles as JSpace's creator and its launcher, and also as responsible for enabling and developing its future leadership. So after 1 year, I passed the reins, the role of chair, to someone else. And fortunately, JSpace has been blessed ever since with excellent and talented leadership. After me came Izzy Lyon, Hart Schwartz, and then of course, the inimitable Karen Mock. My deep thanks to both Izzy and Hart for all they did for JSpace. And as for Karen, I know that others will speak tonight in her praise as she steps down as president, but I'd like to say here what a splendid job Karen has done and what an enormous contribution she's made to JSpace over these years. So kol hakavod, Karen, and thank you. And welcome, Jordan and Kara, and I'm looking forward to your wonderful leadership too.
On that with Karen, I agree. And of course, we extend the same to you as well. You know, but before we go, I guess my last question is about hope. You know, the focus of this event is on hope and, you know, building hope for the future. And I guess, you know, based off of the past 10 years and even looking forward, what, based on your experience and your involvement with the progressive Jewish and Zionist communities in Canada, gives you hope?
Well, my attitude to social change is that it's important to remember that you often don't really know the impact you have on other people, or even more broadly on a community or your country. You know, you plant a seed and you hope it flowers, is how I think of it. For instance, I never imagined that JSpace would flower as it did or become what it has. So the main thing is just to keep planting and working and not give up. And I think sometimes, you know, only your work has kept a whole hill or even a mountain from eroding. That's how I picture it. And you may plant and you don't see any flowers on the hill and you might think, oh, I didn't accomplish anything. And in fact, you and your seeds may have prevented the collapse of a whole mountain. Or to be a little less metaphysical here, you know, your generation is the future, Jordan. I mean, you and the rest of JSpace, together with other progressive Jewish organizations in Canada and beyond, are a crucial bulwark against the encroaching oppression and injustices in Israel. And when diaspora Jews criticize something that is happening in Israel, the Israeli government does not necessarily change its actions or direction, but it does hear and it does take notice. And similarly, JSpace is crucially important for keeping the Canadian Jewish community from sliding inexorably to the right. JSpace is a valuable counterbalance to that. And equally important, it provides a place for the next generation of young Canadian Jews where they can ask questions and challenge and engage critically about Israel and other Jewish issues. I think without JSpace, they might think there's no place for them in the Canadian Jewish community and become estranged altogether from both Israel and Jewish life. There's a saying Despair is a luxury we can't afford, and the antidote to despair is action. And I think this is true. And I also think that the work can be very overwhelming. I've experienced this myself. So if it happens to you, I suggest you try to remember the words from Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, that begin, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It is not upon you to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. In other words, you also remember that you don't have to finish it. You just keep on planting. You do what you can. You plant and you hope, which is the theme of today. You keep on planting. And as they say in Hebrew, chisku ve'imsu, be strong and of good courage.
Spoken like a true author. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nora. I know our time is short today, but I mean, this conversation in and of itself is one that I commit to continuing, because there's so much more I want to ask you and so much more that I think we can all learn from. But I really want to thank you for all you've done, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
As do I. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Thanks so much, Nora. In the years after Nora and then Izzy's tenure, JSpace Canada continued to grow, bringing in new voices and leaders to help the organization get off its feet and reach new people. Hart Schwartz, who Nora mentioned, and as many of you know, played an invaluable role in this period. Hart was known to many in the community as the co-president of the First Nor'Iver congregation and as a well-respected human rights lawyer. When there was a need for someone to take over as chair, he stepped up to the role, leading the organization into the 2016 AGM when Karen Mock took over. More on Karen later. In this period, there was also countless others who stepped up in various capacities on the JSpace Canada team. And many of them have sat on our current board up until this very day, mere hours ago, when their terms came to an end. And as we welcome in the next decade, I also want to pay special recognition to these 5 individuals. I'll start with Henry Rushin, who in addition to being on our board, has concurrently served as our treasurer for a few years now. Managing the finances for an all-volunteer organization is no small feat, especially around conference time. It's even more impressive when you realize that Henry's background is not in finance, but as a pharmacist. When we needed the support, Henry stepped up, and we're entirely and eternally grateful for everything that he's done. There's Francine Dick, a longtime JSpace Canada volunteer who has spent the past few years as our board secretary. Ask anyone at JSpace and they'll tell you that Francine is one of the kindest, most uplifting people that they know. She has brought organization to JSpace's operations, but more importantly, a very good energy that we all cherish deeply. Barbara Landau, who you saw spoke in the video, is also concluding her term. Barb has been a longtime volunteer at JSpace, where she's brought years of experience in interfaith dialogue, understanding, and engagement. She's played a key role in strengthening JSpace's relationships and partnerships with progressive Jewish groups in Canada and across the world through JLink, the international network of progressive Jewish organizations. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Barb recently was awarded the Order of Canada for her work in interfaith dialogue, and we are forever grateful for her work with JSpace. And I'll conclude with David Grosskind, who, if you don't know, it's likely because he's behind the scenes most of the time. In fact, he's behind the scenes at this webinar right now. He wears many hats. He started off as webmaster and then managed our mailing lists, and he's proved even more crucial in our move to online programming, supporting our webinars, our stakeholder communications, and the list goes on and on. David has been an invaluable member of the JSpace Canada team, and while he's continuing on as a volunteer, his work over the past few years has set us up for greater success. But really, to conclude, I'll go to Karen, who is our main honoree of tonight. Most of you don't need an introduction to Karen, but I'll give you a very brief reminder of her background. She's a leading expert on human rights, equity, and anti-racism education, a career for which she has been recognized with the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal and the Order of Canada. She's the former executive director of the League for Human Rights of B'nai B'rith Canada and of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. She's a past president of the Canadian Friends of Haifa University and an active founding member of the Equity Summit Group of the Anti-Racist Multicultural Education Network, the Canadian Association of Jews and Muslims, the Canadian Arab Jewish Leadership Dialogue, and Heart to Heart. She's been involved with JSpace since its inception and has been the president and chair for the past 5 years. Throughout her tenure, Karen has worked tirelessly behind the scenes to build the foundation we needed for this moment at our 10th anniversary, growing JSpace Canada's national presence, securing the organization's charitable status, recruiting a stellar team of progressive Jewish leaders to our board. And with her term ending today, we wanted to take some time to recognize her years of leadership. Karen has had a tremendous impact on countless individuals, and so many wanted to share their words with her. So without further ado, let's take a look back at Karen's impact.
And earlier this season, I interviewed anti-racism educator Karen Mock. She's the executive director of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. Karen is also one of the country's foremost authorities on hate crimes, and this is her story.
Two main mandates that had a tremendous influence on my life: Gemulat Hasadim, look after one another, and Tikkun Olam, heal the world.
I want to take a minute to express my gratitude to Dr. Karen Mock.
Dr. Karen Mock.
My friend and outgoing JSpace president, Karen Mock.
Hi, Karen.
We go way back to our times together at B'nai B'rith, where you led the League of Human Rights of B'nai B'rith Canada, and to my work at Canadian Jewish Congress, where together we fought battles against hate mongers, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, homegrown terrorists, and others. And we were a dynamic duo, and we continue to be a dynamic duo. I want to wish you mazal as you go forward from strength to strength. Whatever the future brings you, it will be great because you are who you are.
Karen, I want to tell a story about you that isn't that well known. Trust me, I won't embarrass you. In Cincinnati, there is a Freedom Museum that tells the story of the Underground Railroad across the Ohio River from slavery to freedom. And in one of the exhibits, there are faces and descriptions of individuals who have fought for human rights since the liberation of slaves. And I took a look, and there were the faces of Nelson Mandela, Elie Wiesel, Martin Luther King, and right among that very distinguished group was the photo and the bio of Karen Mock. Karen, you have an international reputation as a fighter for human rights and an advocate for mutual understanding among peoples. You have been honored here at home with the Order of Canada. And for the past several years, you have dedicated that same passion towards progressive Zionism in JSpace. And we have all benefited from the talent that you have lent to our organization.
I became involved in JSpace after the November 2019 conference. At the time, I actually didn't know Karen very well. Yet, when I reached out to her after the conference, she promptly invited me to an internal meeting where the future of the organization was going to be discussed. So I went. I was new, young. I don't think Karen necessarily agreed with me about everything, but what I will say is that she made me feel very welcome. Like I belonged there and was really free to share what I had to say. So why was Karen so devoted to being welcoming? I think it's because she truly believes in the mission of building a multi-generational coalition for progressive Jewish values here in Canada.
Karen, you've been warm, welcoming, and a joy to connect with. Thank you for your time and expertise and for all you've done these last 5 years to help JSpace grow, scale up its impact, and empower the next generation of progressive Jewish leaders.
I've known Karen for many years. When I was president of Canadian Friends of Haifa University, she came on the board and then she succeeded me as president. She's done incredibly important and heroic work in the community in the area of human rights, public education, community relations, peaceful coexistence, conflict resolution, and the like. I wish Karen every happiness and joy in the next chapter of her life, and thank her. Infinite gratitude to you.
I met Karen 30 years ago when I was a judge, and she was the executive director at the League for Human Rights at B'nai B'rith Canada. Karen helped design and was the featured keynote presenter in a 3-day comprehensive seminar for the judges in Western Canada in 1992. This seminar was very unique because it was the first time that the Canadian judges had tackled that issue of racism in an in-depth manner. Karen is fundamentally an educator at heart. She led courageous conversations with the judiciary, and as her student, I can say she's very gifted with being able to present complex issues in a meaningful and understandable manner. Karen had a profound impact on my life, both professionally and personally.
Karen, many moons ago, was the executive director of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation when we were a small growing organization, and we still are growing, but she played an instrumental role in our organization. And I still hear people comparing what we're doing now to what Karen was doing 10, 15 years ago. And that just speaks to the depth of engagement that she had within the community, the level of respect that she gained and garnered, and it speaks to the testament of the timeliness of her work.
Karen Mock has been a real leader in bringing our progressive voices together. Karen, thank you for your initiative, dedication and drive, and your wonderful persistence.
Now, congratulations on your 10th anniversary, and congratulations to Karen Mock, who I have known professionally for many, many years, but became friends with around 15 years ago when we co-founded a Jewish Arab-Palestinian dialogue group. And that started a journey, a 15-year-long journey of conversations and dialogues that created a lot of understanding on common ground, but also it highlighted some of the differences in opinion that we had. I measure the strength of that friendship not by the number of agreements we had, but more importantly by the number of disagreements we've been able to overcome. And that's, to me, a true measure of friendship.
For the last 5 years, Karen has dedicated herself to raising the profile of JSpaceCanada. She has worked tirelessly to reinforce our foundation, create the necessary organizational structures to move us forward, and to reinvigorate our vision for the future.
Tonight we honor the leadership and the wisdom of Dr. Karen Mock. Her tireless efforts and advocacy in this sphere are emblematic of what she holds dear, that the dignity and honor of one's neighbor is as valuable as one's own. She is led by action and personal example, and today she can look around and see the impact of her work as our young leaders who move this important work forward in JSpace today. Karen, you are a dear friend, and I honor you, appreciate you, and thank you for all that you do and have done, and for what you stand for.
Karen, wow, the end of a tenure. It's been a wonderful past, is it almost 4 years for me working with you as the head of New Israel Fund to the head of JSpaceCanada. It's been a pleasure and an honor, and I've learned so much from you. You've taken that organization from strength to strength, and you've carried it to its next stage of growth. And the people who are taking over after you are lucky to have had someone like you to learn from, and they're lucky to be ready to take that organization to the next step. You've been a long-time part of our whole progressive Jewish community on so many issues, not just the Israel piece. So we owe you debts of gratitude for a lifetime of service. But for the past few years as president of JSpaceCanada, the way you've lifted the profile of that organization and strengthened it, really we, the New Israel Fund of Canada, one of your biggest partners, and we, the progressive Jewish community of Canada, really do owe you our greatest thanks.
Thank you for your tireless efforts over the years in making JSpaceCanada the incredible organization it is. It has always been a pleasure to work with you. You've always been a strong voice and advocate for issues of social justice, equity, and inclusion in Canada. I wish you all the best in this next and important chapter in your life.
Karen Mock, an educational leader, a human rights consultant, a psychologist, but most importantly, a person who has embodied the mission of JSpace and its values, a person who has personified the pursuit of peace and justice, a person with whom I've had the pleasure to work in the trenches of human rights over the years, and a person whose friendship has in fact enhanced immeasurably my own engagement and involvement in these issues. Thank you.
Today, I'm also here to thank Dr. Karen Mock for all her dedication and leadership at JSpace, but also Karen, for your friendship and mentorship for me personally for decades. Karen, you have always been a role model as a dedicated advocate for cultural diversity and human rights, and walking the talk in everything you have done to get JSpace to where it is today. You increased programming, strengthened JSpace's national presence, and oversaw a pivot to online throughout the pandemic, among numerous other important accomplishments. Under your leadership, JSpace has become one of the most important advocacy organizations in Canada, and this work will continue. You have worked so hard to foster an environment that nurtures emerging young leaders that will carry on the vital work of JSpace now and into the future.
Karen, you have provided students like myself with a voice, a platform to try and make the world a safer and more inclusive space for Jews and Palestinians alike, a space for nuance in a conflict that can feel so black and white. Karen, I am so thankful for our time at JSpace together and for all that JSpace has become under your leadership.
Over the next 10 years, we are going to be building the pro-peace movement of our dreams. And this moment of renewal is going to be the jettison, the launching pad for doing that. But at the end of the day, it's all possible because of the work that Karen did in these past years. So to Karen, I want to say Toda Rabah and Yasher Koach.
Mazal Tov and carry on.
Mazal Tov with lots of love. Mwah.
Mazel Tov Karen, Mazel Tov JSpace, and Mazel Tov to everyone in our organization. All the very best.
And on that note, I want to carry on and extend the energy of that video in welcoming Karen, who's live reacting to this. So I'm sorry, Karen, to put you on the spot. But you know, it's a very important moment, and we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to talk with us. And we're really grateful to have you. How you doing?
Wow. You told me there were going to be some surprises, and you kept this whole evening from me. And those of you who know me know it takes a lot to make me speechless, but I hardly know what to say. Oh my gosh, Jordan, thank you so much, everyone. It just blows me away.
No, and I think, listen, I think like I said, there were so many people who had so many different things to say. And I think one comment that was repeatedly made is the fact that you cede space to younger people. And I know I'm a testament to that. And, you know, I've always been curious about what drew you to JSpace, because, you know, I can tell my story about how I came to JSpace, and it's because I was very involved with pro-Israel organizing on campus, and I got somewhat disillusioned with it by third year in university, and I was exploring the world and the thoughts of progressive Zionism, and it brought me to the J Street conference in Washington, D.C. and I want to say 2016. And I remember being there and constantly seeing on this large screen, which had a live Twitter thread of anyone who tweeted about the conference. And it was this repeated message from someone named Karen Mock, who kept talking about the Canadian stand in the exhibition hall. and this organization, JSpace Canada, which I had heard of. So I went to it, and that's, of course, where I first met you. And, months later, I was moderating a panel at the 2017 conference and 2019 conference. I was the co-chair, and here I am carrying on the mantle. That's how I got involved. And I'm curious, someone with such an extensive background like yourself, why did you choose JSpace?
Well, I'll never forget that day, seeing you run down the hall to the booth at J Street. But when Nora was speaking, and it reminded me of the day we're celebrating today, the actual launch of JSpace after she and her team had laid the groundwork. Most of us who were there, when they got up and said why they were there, it was because Nora invited us. And that's what drew me to JSpace. And to me, that's even testimony that it really is all about relationships and feeling welcomed. So when we all gathered at the JCC downtown that day, I called it all the usual suspects, from the center left, from the progressive Zionist world, came out, and it was mostly because we've been invited by someone we trusted. And I didn't look back. The climate that Nora described was exactly as it was. And I felt comfortable among other people who, as we say, knew the language of the left. And in our progressive spaces, the same as we'd experienced in the late 80s and early 90s that drew me to become head of the League for Human Rights of B'nai B'rith, we had then begun to see the rise of anti-Semitism in some of the anti-racism spaces. We resolved a lot of that in the mid-90s and felt strong again and in coalition. But here we were in the mid-2000s, and by 2011, where we needed a way to have strength with each other, and at the same time, people who were credible with unions, with political arenas, with teachers' federations or church groups, or Arab and Palestinian and Muslim colleagues, because we truly did believe in our values of human rights. And that's what drew me, and still does. And by the way, Nora, keep all those files and records, because it's very important to any organization to have the proper archives. And we will take some time in the coming years, I hope, to make sure that all of this is really well documented.
Yeah, archival material is just so fascinating to sift through. I say that obviously as someone who worked on this past video that we just shared. Fascinating to do that, but also because it really does, document the work that's been done. And on that note, I mean, looking back at the past 5 years, but of course, the 9-10 years that you've been involved with JSpace, what are you most proud of? And I know there's so much you could point to, but if you had to pick some intangible things, what are you really proud about in your legacy?
Well, I'm proud of being able to carry on what Nora and Izzy and Hart started. At that first meeting, it was so impressive because they said, okay, over here, all the people who want to be involved in education and helping members of our community in their workplaces and in their classrooms and in their school to speak up and to be strong, go here. All the ones who want to help with communication, go here. And the key, and all those who want to work with the youth and the younger people and be part of a youth group, go there. So I was very proud of that kind of concept. And they engaged me right away because I went to the education side, because that's where I come from, being able to pass on some of the strategies or do workshops. And in fact, that's where a lot of people ended up coming out to some of these seminars who are involved with JSpace till today. And so I'm proud of the fact that when we recognize someone, I mean, Michael described in that video, you know, whoever spoke up and showed a real interest, come on and join us. We'll find a place for you. Actually, that's been one of the biggest frustrations of the COVID years, is that personal connection, and we're not able to do that. So I'm proud of being able to carry that on. I'm also very proud of bringing in you and people like you who and recognize what engagement is all about. You know, just the way someone said, you know, we couldn't be token lefties on a committee. Similarly, we didn't just want token youth. And my fellow and sister board members will remember, I didn't agree to be president until they agreed that we could actually have younger generation members on the board as decision makers, not, oh yes, we must have a youth on the panel, or oh, we must have, you know, let them have their own youth group, but be part of the decision making and the importance of succession planning, and when they're ready, making sure you get out of the way and let them lead. In fact, had it not been for COVID, I probably would have been gone last year because your time has come. One last thing that is a little bit of a downer for a lot of people, but I think in the end, people realized it was important. You know, as Margaret Mead said, there's nothing more powerful than a small group of people who are really committed to an idea. Yes, that's true. But when I came on, I remember Frida describing it as, well, we're kind of a loose collective of leftover hippies. And I thought, you know, inclusiveness is important and collective decision-making is important, but it was also important to become a real organization. And so I know it was tedious for some, and I know it was a little bit of a nag for others. And I'm grateful for people like Mark Anshan, who's our volunteer honorary legal counsel, who helped us create a registered not-for-profit organization, you know, that's done according to Hoyle, if you know what I mean. You know, we follow all the guidelines. It's the only way we can be sustainable. We then also created a charitable foundation. And as we all know now, we were able to merge the two because of the changes in the CRA. So the JSpaceCanada Foundation, a charitable organization, which is also now known as JSpaceCanada, can move to the next stage. So I'm glad and proud that we got all that paperwork and all that tedious administrative stuff that you folks, your generation, won't have to worry about, but that you can continue to build that on. And I know I'm not going to be able to take more time, but I'll keep telling you all the things I'm proud of as we move along.
A running list would be most welcome. I don't mean that in any jest. No, and I think, listen, there's so much to be proud of. And I think there's so many reasons to be hopeful. And of course, the theme for, you know, this evening is about building hope. So, you know, I asked Nora, and I like wanted to ask you as well, what in looking back at your tenure and looking forward, what is a source of hope for you?
A source of hope for me comes from the partnerships that we were able to build, and people realizing that we're not here to compete, but to support. You know, I once did a manual, we called it taking action against hate, protection, prevention, and partnerships. But sadly, sometimes the work in our community is more about contention and controversy and collisions. And when Nora mentioned, a lot of the people said, what do we need another organization for? the people who said that were more the people who felt perhaps a little bit threatened that we were going to be competitors and not partners. And that took a little while to get through. So I feel hopeful, and you heard so many of the speakers from the other organizations that we have a strong network or coalition of, right now it's 9 progressive Zionist organizations in Canada, and we welcome the others. That gives me hope, the partnership. The next generations give me hope that we can carry that through. The relationships that we built, Muslims and Jews, Palestinians and Jews in Canada, that gives me hope. And the kind of support that we can provide for comparable projects over there. But right now, our audience is here. It's how do we help young people find their voice to support human rights, social justice, and equity, and to be able to support and love Israel. But criticizing Israeli policies does not mean you're a self-hating Jew. I try to remain hopeful when people in our own community call me a self-hating Jew after a lifetime of service in the Jewish community. And I've always said that if people don't have real arguments or real points to make, they then turn around and call names. So I'm hopeful that, I guess as the politicos say, we'll have more evidence-based decision-making. I'm hopeful that we will do all the pre-dialogue work that's necessary to have those courageous conversations. I'm hopeful that we'll continue to speak up. We're not called anti-Canadian when we speak up against policies of the Canadian government that we're not happy with. So we are not anti-Jewish or anti-Zionist when we speak up against those policies. Your generation gives me hope, the hope of even the seniors generation like mine who are willing to give their time to support you, not to tell you what to do. And the hope that there is that reciprocal relationship of the so-called elders in the community and the next generations who are the leaders, and hopefully we've given you something to build on, and we're not going to let you down. I have wonderful hope.
And I definitely, hope to tell you that we're not going to let you down either. Quite more confident about that. And I know David Burson in his closing video, raised a glass, and I might have just seen a glass there. I have a glass full. It's pretty hefty actually. But I want to raise a glass to you and to everyone who came before you and all the work that you've done to build JSpace and a strong foundation. Building hope together, seriously.
Building hope together. And I'm going to raise a glass and promise that as soon as we can all get together in person, you may know that this is a huge transition time. And my husband, David, and my husband of 54 years, who of course I couldn't have done all of this without, and neither could JSpace have done all of this without, and my family, and we'll all welcome you. Now there's a party room in the place that I'm in, and we'll all get together again, our old board, our new board, our founders, and our future, and raise a glass to the strength. Mazel tov.
Hear, hear.
Mazel tov to you and to Kara and the new board, and all the best. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Karen. I hate to force you off the screen with that, but I know we're trying to keep on time. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.
In the conversation.
Be well.
You too. So, we've heard many times this evening comments about the need to empower the next generation. And as many of you know, the path forward for progressive Jewish advocacy in Canada requires the leadership of young people. For context, and I think this is an important context, because not everyone, not everyone thinks about this. People under the age of 30, like myself, not to age myself, we didn't live through the 1948 war. We weren't alive for 1967, 1973. Many were toddlers or not yet born when Oslo was signed. And I think that's, an important point to bring up, because for many people within my generation, the only Israel we know is an Israel engaged in occupation. And there's a growing chorus of Jews, despite growing up in Jewish day schools, attending Jewish summer camp, and being socialized in Zionist environments, who are questioning the accepted positioning within our community that in order to support Israel, you need to support its policies. And JSpace exists to provide an alternative to that approach, to recognize that one's connection to Israel and love for Israel is not lessened if they speak out against the situation in the West Bank. And with polarization increasing more than ever, our voice is more important than ever. So to close out the night, and I know I did promise that we would stick to time. So to close out the night, I really want to focus on the next generation, and particularly two of our next generation volunteers, to discuss their perspectives about the need for JSpace's work in the coming years. So Billy Cohen, one of the people I'll be introducing, works in Toronto as an urban planner. He was raised in the BBYO movement and was the president of Hillel Ottawa while he was a student at Carleton. He first got involved at JSpace at the 2019 biannual conference, and he's an active volunteer with JSpace working on our communications. Georgia Gardner is completing an English language and literature degree at Queen's University. She's been involved with JSpaceCanada since 2019, when she began working as JSpace's social justice intern. Since then, she's gotten further involved in the Jewish community as the program coordinator of Queen's Hillel's Interfaith and Partnerships Committee. I'm excited to speak with both of you tonight, and I'm happy you're on the screen so we can have this conversation. And I think I want to start off with just a general background on both of you, because I think one question I've been routinely asked by people in the progressive Zionist space in Canada is, what labor Zionist camp did you go to? Or what movement were you a part of before joining JSpace? As if the only people who could be involved in progressive Zionist spaces in Canada are those who come from the labor Zionist movement. And that is not to slight the labor Zionist movement, which does invaluable work. But I think what's unique, I think, for a lot of people involved in JSpace is that they don't necessarily come from that background. So I guess I want to open the floor and ask you folks about your background, your Jewish background, and what brought you to JSpace.
Yeah, so I'll start. First of all, thank you, Jordan, for that introduction and for having me. I'm so thrilled to be part of this gala to help in honoring all that JSpace has done. So I found JSpace when I was looking for a summer job out of high school. I couldn't seem to find the right fit. I must have applied to like 10 jobs, and I ended up finding JSpace. And I'd grown up at a Renew congregation and children's school, so I had a progressive Jewish upbringing that instilled values of tikkun olam, peace, and tolerance, but I was certainly not active in Israeli and Jewish politics. And so I really found a home at JSpace that allowed me to become educated through the mentorship of Karen on these important topics, ones that sort of match the progressive Jewish values that I grew up with. And I'm especially thankful to have had a teacher in Karen that has shaped me into the person who I am today. I remember sort of preparation for the 2019 conference, spending every day of the summer in Karen's home office, which is actually her kitchen table, working together, learning from her. And I'm tremendously grateful for what JSpace has provided me, and for Karen as a mentor and as a friend.
Nice. So, but not an extensive Renew, obviously with humanistic and progressive Judaism, but we were kind of your first introduction to the world, which I think is very unique. I think for most people, it is not a progressive Zionist organization, which is the first entry point to learning about Israel. I think that's Billy, I assume the same was not for you. So
yeah, Jordan, again, thanks so much for having me on this panel. Getting to speak alongside George is also an honor. And to get to speak at a gala honoring Karen Mock, a personal role model and a friend of mine. So I'm very happy to be here. Jordan, as you know, as we've spoken many times about, I grew up in a very mainstream conservative Jewish community. I did the typical heavy Jewish involvement circuit, day school, chat, Jewish summer camp. And yeah, I served as the president of my youth group and my university's Hillel. I was raised in a relatively right-leaning Zionist household and institutions that did a great job at celebrating Israel loudly and often, but didn't meaningfully broach the difficult but necessary conversations on the real issues, including the human rights abuses in Israel and Palestine, which for that reason, I never really felt equipped to think about Israel from a lens of both critique and pride, but only a toxic extreme of one or the other. In 2018, I went on Birthright, which is, many people say, is one of the most impactful 10 days of a young Jew's life, which it really was for me. I was there during a war, and a few days after my trip ended, I went to visit the West Bank cities of Bethlehem and Ramallah. I saw a refugee camp, and frankly was pretty horrified of what I saw on the literal and figurative other side of the wall that most Jews never really see in their lifetime. Coming back to Toronto after that, I attended a UJA talk featuring Tzipi Livni, and which was where I met Karen in person for the first time after she heard me talking to Tzipi about progressive Zionism. And that's really the beginning of an amazing story of my involvement with JSpace. Most young people like myself tend to gravitate towards one of those extremes of pride or critique, particularly when they're confronted with the uncomfortable realities of the occupation. And I'm so lucky to have found a community in JSpace that fosters a genuine love for Israel and a desire for it to live up to our Jewish values that we were raised with, and that stresses the importance of getting this once in a few millennia Zionist project right, because we have to get this right.
No, I think both of what you said it really strikes home with me. And I think my background is, like I mentioned, I came from the background of being an organizer on campus, involved in pro-Israel politics, and a lot of the work that I did, I look back on. A lot of the stuff, I'm grateful for the experiences and opportunities, but I do think it's really important that I wish I'd been given a little bit more of an outlet through an organization to be able to learn more about progressive Zionism and the fact that you can be a strong supporter of Israel and also be a strong supporter of human rights and democracy, and that isn't incongruent with one's Zionism or support. And I've really, enjoyed the opportunities that I've got to work with all of you. And so I guess that leads to, my next question is, over the past few years that both of you have been involved with JSpace, what are some of your fondest memories?
Well, it's a tough choice to sort of narrow down, Jordan, but if I had to pick one, it would probably be the virtual vigil that we held in May after the flare up in Israel and the amount of conflict and death and divisiveness that ensued afterwards. I've always sort of understood JSpace values from when I started working there in 2019 and its mission towards peace. But when we co-sponsored this virtual vigil that joined Jews and Palestinians alike in mourning the lives that were lost, it really crystallized for me what JSpace is all about. To mourn together, to sing together, for everybody to unite on a common front. That feeling of togetherness and solidarity amidst such a divisive time is something that I will carry with me in this work moving forward, and one that I will truly never forget. It was a really, really powerful moment for everybody that was involved.
It was.
I'd have to say that my most impactful JSpace memory, it's got to be the 2019 conference. I was invited to speak on a panel about progressive Zionism on campus, or frankly, the lack thereof at that point. And I spoke with two people who would shortly become some of my closest friends. I have to say that I met some of my closest and dearest friends through JSpace, which was, really impactful to find that community of progressive Jews with that share my values. At that conference, I met really influential people like Shaked Morag, who is the executive director of Peace Now, Shalom Achshav in Israel. I met Raja Khoury, who imparted some amazing life advice unto me about advocacy and dealing with the extremists within both of our communities. And it just really inspired me to really understand and push for a better future, because there is a better future for Jews, Israelis, and Palestinians that's worth fighting for. And I'm really happy that JSpace has given us a medium and an avenue for that type of advocacy.
Totally. I mean, that almost answers what was going to be my last question, which is what gives both of you hope.
One thing that JSpace has certainly led me to, both from sort of a political and educational perspective, is it's really encouraged me to get more involved in sort of Jewish life outside of JSpace. And so this year I really started getting involved in Queens Hillel. And I think through Hillel, it sort of led me to engage with other progressive Jewish students who share the same pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-peace values that I do. There are a lot of progressive Jewish students my age who feel like there's no Jewish organization that truly reflects their progressive values. There's no organization where they can both support, Israel, but also support Palestinian human rights. And as Karen mentioned, not feeling like, they're going against their Jewish people. There's no organization that can be a voice of reason, tolerance, and can prioritize human rights and unity within the IP conflict. And that's really something that JSpace does. And I'm so excited for JSpace to grow, and for those students who don't feel like they have a home politically to find us, and for JSpace to really provide a community for those that are desperate for it.
That's so well said. I couldn't agree more. The youth voice gives me hope. I don't know how else to say it. The majority of Jewish youth are progressive, and we want to see positive change in the Jewish homeland that we all hold so dear. Again, we're progressive as a whole, and we're willing to put our Jewish values of Gimilut Chasadim and Tikkun Olam that Karen mentioned earlier into action. I think it's so crucial that we harness the progressive energy of our generations into pro-peace anti-occupation activism, rather than into activism put forth by a loud fringe that hopes to tear it all down. Because, I was raised with the values that my Zeta imparted on me, that, Israel is our refuge. Israel is a place that we should all be proud of, stick up for, and defend. And I take that very seriously. I take that very personally, and that Israel's a place and a project that all of the Jewish people should be proud of, that should represent us and should represent our values. And it's truly on us to make sure that Zionist dream is put into action in a way that we could all be proud of. But I have hope for the future.
I mean, that makes me very hopeful. I am so grateful that you both took some time out of your day for this and to celebrate this important moment. Thank you for helping us build hope. And I know that sounds tacky, but seriously, I'm feeling more hopeful. And I know I'm going to see both of you soon working on this really important work that we do. And I really can't wait to see what we get up to. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Jordan.
So we are now at the close of our event, and I'll just conclude by saying thank you again to everyone here who joined us tonight, who contributed to this event, and who really has contributed to the past 10 years of JSpace. As we enter our 11th year, we do so with a concerted focus on renewal. Right now we're amidst the strategic planning process to really drive home and clarify our values and the work that we do, and really ensure that we have the right tools to move forward to meet this really important moment. And I know internal processes aren't sexy to talk about, but I say this because I want everyone, listening and watching to know that we understand how important it is for us to be vibrant and for us to be a welcoming space for progressive Jewish values and Israeli-Palestinian peace, because we know this work is so important, especially as, we enter and we continue to exist in such a time of polarization. So I am going to raise one last glass to everyone here, and to really everyone who has contributed to JSpace's amazing 10 years. I can't wait to continue on this journey, and I want to thank you all sincerely again. So thank you for joining us, and good night. Here's to 10 more years.